Welcome to Weather Wednesday here at New England Storm Center. So, it was only a matter of time in this pattern. This is the third Weather Wednesday in a row that we're going to be talking about flooding in New England. And these flooding events have really been compounding on each other. Last Wednesday, I said that the 4th of July flash flooding that occurred in southern New England, in Connecticut and Rhode Island, was the worst yet. And then this past Friday, we had flash flooding, numerous flash flood warnings and severe thunderstorm warnings that rolled through Vermont and Maine. That would, of course, be a precursor to the full disaster that occurred this Sunday into Monday. And this really historic flooding event, it truly is historic. I've mentioned before that Vermont's three big floods were 1927, 1973, and 2011. It is now, of course, the big four floods, as we can add 2023 into that mix. This flood did draw comparisons to Irene in 2011, which set the benchmark for modern flooding in Vermont. And it's really amazing that just 12 years later, we're already having the storm that challenged that benchmark. Everyone so far I've heard have said this is the same as Irene or even worse than Irene. Of course, whether this storm was the same, worse, or not as bad will come down to everyone's individual experiences. The Winooski River rose 2 feet above Irene's flooding in 2011. The Lamoille River rose 4 feet above Irene's level. So this storm began to slowly ramp up on Sunday evening, and it was actually southwest New Hampshire that bore the brunt of the very beginning, the very first phase of the storm, when a very slow-moving thunderstorm moved through the communities of Winchester, Swansea, and the surrounding areas. This cell dropped nearly 5 inches of rain over the course of 1 to 2 hours. Numerous roads in Winchester and Swansea were washed out, including major damage to Route 10 in Winchester. When I saw the image of Route 10 on Sunday evening, I was really taken aback by that. And of course, that image would just be a precursor to what would come to Vermont. So rainfall did begin to fill into Vermont throughout Sunday night and into early Monday morning. By 3 a.m., large areas of the state were covered by flash flood warnings. At this point, the flash flooding was officially called life-threatening by the National Weather Service. At this time, storm reports were very slow to come in, of course. The middle of the night, everyone's sleeping. Not only is everyone sleeping, but it's dark, so it's very hard to see exactly what's going on out there, which makes it that much more dangerous. When these events happen overnight, it is so dangerous. So by about 7 o'clock in the morning, the sun had started to come up, and that started to reveal the nature of the flooding. It was becoming clear at this point that this would be a disastrous situation, that this was going to be a full-scale natural disaster for Vermont. Flooding was already very significant, and the rain was going to continue all day, well into the evening hours on Monday. Multiple rescues had already been reported to have happened or were ongoing. There was a storm report that I saw that said that there was a swift river rescue of 10 people at a campground overnight. Around 7:30, just before 7:30 in the morning, something truly unprecedented happened. Really, it was shocking when I saw it. Again, really taken aback. It was something that was always on the table with this event. Of course, the Weather Prediction Center did have Vermont in the high category for excessive rainfall, which is just massive. That's very rarely put out a high category for flash flooding, but they did for Vermont. So this was on the table, but when it happened, it's still, it's shocking to say the least. The National Weather Service issued a flash flood emergency. These emergencies debuted in 2014. This was the first ever alert issued in Vermont. It might be the first ever in New England. I don't have records of every alert that's been issued. I can't remember a time where a flash flood emergency had ever been issued anywhere in New England, but I cannot confirm that. I can confirm this is the first one ever in Vermont. So the National Weather Service says, quote, these alerts are issued for exceedingly rare situations when extremely heavy rain is leading to a severe threat to human life and catastrophic damage from flash flooding. Typically, emergency officials are reporting life-threatening water rises, resulting in water rescues and evacuations. And of course, all of that was happening by early Monday morning in Vermont. This alert was issued for Weston, Ludlow, Andover, and Bridgewater. These communities would prove, Ludlow in particular, would prove to be the epicenter of this disaster. By 9 o'clock in the morning, really stunning images and videos began emerging from the ravaged town and really all over Vermont. Flash flood warnings continued to expand throughout the morning. By midday, most of the state was covered by the alert, which is really something. Typically, most of the time flash flood warnings are confined to a smaller area or scattered around. This was a widespread, big block of flash flood warnings covering basically the entire state of Vermont. Dozens of major routes across the state were shut down due to either floodwaters over the road, mud over the road, or the road being heavily damaged or destroyed. Later in the morning, the heavy rain began to spread east in New England. Vermont, while they proved to be by far the hardest hit by this disaster, other areas of New England saw issues. At 11 a.m., a large flood warning was issued for eastern Connecticut, Rhode Island, and southern Worcester County. Multiple cars were reported to be stuck in floodwaters in this area as floods covered roads. This included Providence, who they were part of that rather significant flash flooding event that happened on the 4th of July that we talked about last week. So while this situation in southern New England was developing, heavy rain, of course, was continuing in Vermont to move very slowly. The big problem with this storm is that the rain and the downpours were just moving so slowly. They were just crawling along. While flash flooding was still the primary concern at this point, runoff started to become very serious. Vermont State Police shared a stunning video showing a massive amount of water pouring over a dam. Also late in the morning, around 11 a.m., state officials held a press conference. At this time, officials confirmed that 19 rescues had already been completed by several different agencies. Agencies were also going town to town to perform searches for those in distress. There were agencies that came as far from North Carolina before this event started to help out in these search and rescues. So around midday, a concerning development began to come into the picture in regards to the meteorology of this storm. And the area of low pressure started to become a closed low as the system began to take on a negative tilt. Without going into too much detail, that development would allow rain to blossom in the area of the Winooski River Valley throughout the afternoon. That would become a big issue later on. By the early afternoon, flood alerts were littered across all 6 of New England's states. Of course, Maine was spared by this event, but early in the afternoon, they did have a flood advisory that extended from New Hampshire into extreme western Maine. So all 6 New England states did see flood alerts from this event. So as the afternoon began to wear on, the threat did begin to shift from flash flooding to river flooding. In Vermont and New Hampshire, where the terrain is so varied, all the rain that falls has to go somewhere after running down the hills and the mountains, and where all that water goes is into the region's rivers, streams, and brooks. Evacuations in areas of flood flood-prone places began to spread around the state as rivers were now forecast to reach major flood stage. The fire department of Moretown, Vermont, went door to door to evacuate residents as the Mad River was forecast to hit flood stage by midnight Monday evening. Rivers began approaching major flood stage, including the Winooski River at Montpelier. This is where the concerning development described earlier began coming into play at 8 in the evening. Montpelier was under a flash flood and river flood warning at the same time as heavy rain came down while the Winooski River continued to rise from runoff. At this time, the flooding level from that river surpassed Irene. By Tuesday morning, 7 river gauges were in major flood stage across Vermont. The Lamoille River at Jeffersonville has set a new all-time record for flooding. The Otter Brook in Rutland approached record levels, but it did not surpass it, and I apologize if I'm not pronouncing some of these rivers correctly. I do not live in Vermont. I'm in New England, but I'm not in Vermont, so I do apologize if I'm not getting the pronunciation on some of these rivers correct. By mid-morning on Tuesday, the Winooski River at Montpelier reached 21.35 feet. This is well into major flood stage. Downtown Montpelier was underwater for a long period of time. This rarely became an issue, especially as by Tuesday morning, the Wrightsville Dam was approaching capacity and was being threatened to need a release if the dam did overflow. And if a release was needed, this could cause really catastrophic flooding in Vermont's capital on top of what they already experienced. The dam came within 1 foot of capacity late Tuesday morning, and then it held there for a while, for hours, some very tense hours. The water level did not rise or fall too much in the afternoon, but by Tuesday evening, the level did start falling, and the threat of a disaster in regards to the Wrightsville Dam did start to ease. So as of a press conference that occurred yesterday, over 100 rescues had been performed. There were over 60 people evacuated from houses, buildings, or cars. There were nearly 80 road closures across the state. They also mentioned that they did perform 17 animal rescues. So what was interesting about this storm is that it wasn't this big, powerful, blockbuster storm like, Tropical Storm Irene, like a tropical cyclone. It was just a few kind of mundane pieces that all came together just right in just the right atmosphere. New England has been so humid lately. We've been stuck in this tropical atmosphere, very moisture-rich atmosphere, and that has been feeding these storms. And all of these kind of mundane pieces just came together in this extremely moisture-rich atmosphere to create a devastating flooding situation. And before this event happened, really on Friday, I was really getting concerned that with each each flash flooding event, these events would continue to compound and build on each other as the soil is so saturated. And, coming into this event, the soil was so oversaturated already. And unfortunately, this unsettled pattern is not done yet. We do have rain and the potential for heavy downpours later this week, Thursday into Friday. So that is going to do it for this edition of Weather Wednesday here at New England Storm Center. Of course, stick with NewEnglandStormCenter.com as we will be covering this disaster and everything weather in New England. Just right on through the period, we will have full coverage of this disaster and the recovery on NewEnglandStormCenter.com. So, thank you for listening, thank you for watching, and you will hear from me again next Wednesday. Hopefully we won't be talking about flooding again. This is the third Weather Wednesday in a row talking about flooding in New England.